right, thank you very much. There is one slight tweak to what Meg just said. Alex is actually going to be moderating today's panel, so super happy about that. Alex, I'll give it over to you.
All right, thank you, Darcy. Hey, how's it going, everyone? I am Alexander Losu. I'm currently an analyst on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion team at ServiceNow, and I have the great honor of moderating this panel today. So I'd like to start it off with first saying thank you to Power to Fly for having us here, and then also wanted to give some background information about who ServiceNow is and what do we do, right? So ServiceNow was founded in 2004 by Fred Luddy to help employees and organizations seamlessly work through digital workflows. So take a moment and think about your daily task as workflows. From employee onboarding during COVID, scheduling a doctor's appointment through an online portal, or ordering coffee from Starbucks through your mobile app. These processes are all built on workflows and spur innovation, making the world work better for everyone. So these are just a few examples of how ServiceNow support 80% of Fortune 500 companies, such as Starbucks, Delta Airlines, Overstock and Wayfair, the NBA, the WNBA, Zoom. I mean, look, the list goes on, and that's just to name a few. So shout out to ServiceNow for allowing myself and my colleagues to be here today to talk with you all about today's topic, which is amplifying Black excellence. So with today's topic being about amplifying Black excellence, that all starts with you. You can amplify yourself and others at any level. And I'm excited to explore with you how and why amplifying Black excellence can and should happen across every level of the organization. So we'll get into how ServiceNow helps uplift Black voices, acknowledge our Black employees' contributions, and design donation vehicles to support Black communities and support our employee business groups, or as we like to call them, EBGs. You may have also heard them referred to as ERGs. So now my favorite part is going to be introducing our rockstar studded panel. And first up to bat is Tim. Tim is VP and Treasurer at ServiceNow. In this role, Tim is responsible for capital markets, treasury operations, currency risk management, investments, and insurance. Tim was also the key architect of ServiceNow's $100 million racial equity fund launched in February 2021, with the objective of building equitable opportunities within Black communities by facilitating sustainable wealth creation through home ownership, affordable housing, entrepreneurship, and neighborhood revitalization. Wow, that's a mouthful. Prior to joining ServiceNow, Tim held several treasury roles in various industries, including social media, software, internet infrastructure, smart grid technology, data storage devices, and transportation. Tim earned a Bachelor of Arts in International Business from Whitworth University in Washington and an MBA from Willamette University in Oregon. And one round of applause for Tim. Excited to have you here on the panel with us today. Next up to bat, we have Darcy Brown. Darcy is Senior Director in DI Strategic Partnerships at ServiceNow, where she engages with strategic partners to advance the company's DI narrative, provide inclusive professional development opportunities, and help to open new channels for business growth. Before joining ServiceNow, Darcy honed her experience in reputation management, diversity communications, supply chain communications, and messaging with Fortune 500 companies and nonprofit organizations. She holds an MBA from Cardinal Stritch University and a Bachelor of Arts and Professional Communications from Alverno College, both located in Wisconsin. Darcy also serves as board co-chair for Mentor Greater Milwaukee, is a proud Executive Leadership Council Fellow, member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and a 2020 Empower Future Leader. Give it up for Darcy Brown. And last but certainly not least, we have Andrea. Now, Andrea manages the production and publication of thought leadership content for global marketing campaigns at ServiceNow. In recent years, Andrea worked as a video producer and integrated campaigns manager throughout Southeast Asia. She has produced content for the likes of Jay Shetty, as well as marketed campaigns for brands such as Meta. Andrea, earned her master's degree in journalism at the University of Hertfordshire in the United Kingdom, and now resides in Atlanta, Georgia. Look, the resume of these people are amazing, and I'm happy to be here on this panel with them. So now we're going to start with you all's favorite part, which is the actual questions, the meat of the subject. And who's going to start us off is none other than Tim. So Tim, starting with you, as Vice President Treasurer, you remain vocal for the need to identify, hire, and develop talent for ServiceNow. Would you share a little more about your background, how you amplified yourself and your abilities if and when no one else would, and how would you encourage others to do the same?
Alexander, first of all, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And that was quite the intro, by the way. So thank you. So that's a good question. And I guess I probably wouldn't go way back, but I'll start with at least college anyway. So when I graduated from undergrad, it was a small school, like you mentioned in Washington State. And I graduated, I was like, hey, I need to get a job. And I was trying to find a job, and I just could not find a job. Every time I went for an interview, they said you just don't have the relevant experience. And so, I could see my friends were getting jobs, but for some reason I just couldn't find one. And so I decided, I was like, you know what, I might as well go to grad school. Maybe it would improve my chances, right? I was already broke anyway. So what's being broke for another 2 years and take on more loans? And so I figured, like, might as well go do that. So I went to another small school, got my MBA. And then after graduation, I was like, hey, at this point, I got a few jobs here and there during during grad school. And I thought, it's like, well, I should have pretty good chances now. I guess much to my surprise, I couldn't find a job again. And I was watching my friends just get jobs at Microsoft, at Deloitte, at Intel, and so many other companies. And I just couldn't figure out, like, why couldn't I not find a job? And so, after about, 6 months, I figured, like, I need a job to survive. And so I ended up taking actually a night accountant job at a hotel in Portland. And this was a graveyard shift job. And it's the last thing that I thought I would be doing after getting an MBA. But it was humbling, to say the least, right? And so, a year after is when I actually, found a job in the paper, surprisingly, right? Back in the days when they used to advertise jobs in the paper. And so, so I got a job doing accounting, and I never thought I'd ever be an accountant. But it actually opened a lot of doors for me at that point. So I just, decided, like, I just want to learn, got into a corporate environment. And the one thing that I learned during that time is there was projects that people didn't want to do. And I decided, it's like, these are the projects I'll take on. So I used to look for those types of projects. And those are the projects that actually got me noticed. But like, hey, it's like, you got this ugly project, is like, give Tim this, he'll go figure it out. And so I took that on. And then over time, it was actually not even my manager who noticed the work that I was doing, is actually their manager. Her manager noticed it. And then there came a time when he said, it's like, hey, by the way, we're moving from this mainframe environment to Oracle ERPs. Like, would you be interested? I was like, sure. I didn't know anything about ERPs, never done any implementation of any kind, but I said, sure, I'm in. And so it gave me an opportunity to really learn a lot about not only just kind of systems, but finance in general, and introduced me to a lot of different people at that point, because we had to work with so many people from different groups outside of finance. And so through that experience, it opened new doors, and that's how I ended up in Treasury. And I had no idea what Treasury was. Nobody ever taught Treasury in school, but I figured, like, here's an opportunity to learn. And I was, fortunate enough where I ended up with a manager who was really supportive, and encouraged me, and just said, hey, you just come along, sit in meetings, just listen in. You might not understand what we're talking about, but at least you'll get to, pick up a few things. And so I kind of learned a lot through that process. And over time, he actually became my mentor. And it's somebody, I haven't worked in that company for about 20 years, but I still talk to him probably once a quarter. And so he's been really supportive in terms of, as I've grown in my career, really helping me with situational things, right? It's not even technical part of it, but it's more situational things. And so one of the things that I've, kind of learned over time in terms of just when you think about just, putting yourself out there, right? A lot of times we don't want to talk about our accomplishments, but one of the things that actually one of our board members here at ServiceNow, Larry Quinlan, he's one of the Black board members, he just said to me, he's like, you have to be known for something. And that didn't really, it registered for me as like, you have to be known for something. And then I kind of went back and thought about just the things he had talked, things that I've done in the past. It's like, hey, you're a problem solver, right? You're somebody who comes up with ideas. So it's kind of, those are the small, sometimes we don't think about them, but those are the things that he said, being known for something that people will come to you for, A or B or C, whatever the case might be, but that's what you're known for. And so that really resonated with me. And so it was great advice.
Well, thank you for that. I love the whole part about taking on work that maybe no one else will, even though that's not something I'd like to do. But it shows like what you have to do at times. So I think that's very important. Andrea, I'm gonna pass this off to you because similar to me, you're earlier in your career at ServiceNow. I think it would be interesting to bookend some experience with your experience of how leaders have helped to amplify you and you in turn help others.
Well, first, thank you so much for the fine introduction, as always. But yeah, even though I'm newer to managerial roles in tech, I've always been comfortable helping anyone else that's like new to a team or new to a company, because the leadership that I've gotten has really like molded how I lead people now. I remember last summer when I met my team in person for the first time, and we were sharing our Myers-Briggs personality test results. And that's when I was learning that I'm the advocate personality type. And nobody was surprised to hear that, because I'm always looking out for everyone in the room. I'm trying to make sure that everyone's being treated fairly and everyone's being accounted for. And so within my first 3 months, when I was told that I'll be leading our interns, I took the responsibility very seriously, because I don't feel like interns need busy work. I feel like they need to have ownership. I feel like they need to have a project that they can be proud of and say that I made those decisions myself. So remembering that these are young adults that are looking to mature in their roles and mature on the teams that they're in humbles me, because that's the same approach that I have towards any of my leaders. Instead of having someone show me how they would like something done, I'd rather, them help me be comfortable with doing things that I feel like I'd probably fail at. And that's the same approach that I have with our interns or anyone that I'm leading. Because the best leaders that I've had, I know have like taken notice that I'm very flexible and I'm very moldable. And I don't care if I do something wrong or if I'm failing at something very quickly. And so that's probably why I like to work with people who are also earlier in their careers, because I know that they're going to be a lot more eager to take on a project, and they'll have a very humble approach to doing things incorrectly. And I'm grateful that I'm able to kind of be that guidance for other people, because I know that it's just illustrative of the really good leadership that I've received in my career.
That's amazing to hear. I specifically resonate with ownership over your projects, because the last thing interns need is another coffee run to put on their resume. Actually being able to own something for sure can definitely set you miles apart. So thank you for that piece. Now, Darcy, as a leader in the DI space, you have a unique perspective and background. How would you recommend professionals look for ways to amplify themselves and others?
Thank you, Alex. Well, the first thing I think about, similar to Tim, again, I'm about to date myself, but I was always taught you keep your head down, you do the work, and people will notice. And causing, like me keeping my head down too much, it caused me to miss out on tremendous opportunities to amplify myself and my work. But I received tremendous gifts throughout my career. Women in leadership that look like me. It doesn't necessarily happen. And it generally doesn't happen twice in your career. And it did for me. And one actually challenged me to put the same effort into me as I do for others. I generally would play the background. I generally would make sure everyone else was amplified and recognized. But I never took credit for the work that I did, and I didn't necessarily feel comfortable sharing what I do. So one of the biggest things I would say for people is when you have an opportunity to share, take it. One of the things that I learned, I went through an African American leadership program, and it stays with me, is that stage time is leadership time. There is no better time to define yourself as well as your abilities. And, you know, when you see an opportunity to leverage your skills and your talents, take it. Don't be shy. Similar to what, you know, my fellow panelists have said. And it's okay to do things afraid. If I was to make a list of how many times I've done things afraid, similar to Tim, taking on things which to me are out of my scope, and I question, why do I have to do this? You sit down, you put your head down, and you make it happen. And failing fast is one of the best lessons there is, because when you are in a space where you can fail fast and recover, that is a lesson that will stay with you the remainder of your career as well as your life. But I also want to reinforce that when it's wherever you are in your career, you know, you can always help others. You should help others is more what I need to say. In meetings, whether it's in casual conversations, on social media platforms, clapping and sharing the spotlight with others allows us to continually lift as we climb.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that "doing it afraid" quote on a t-shirt. That is really impactful advice, because often enough, especially when you're early in your career, you're afraid to mess up, you're afraid to look less than, but doing it afraid, I definitely appreciate that advice. So now we're going to talk about how we expand our reach and how we've done it externally. So Tim, back to you. You took a chance and it's helping our community in a big way. Would you share what the ServiceNow Racial Equity Fund is, how it was conceived, and how it's benefiting communities of color across the country?
Sure, definitely. So the idea actually all started back in May of 2020. So we were watching the coverage of George Floyd's murder, and I began to ask myself, you know, what could I do to influence change, right? Because in, you know, previous times I felt so helpless, but this time around is like, gotta do something. So one of the things I actually started looking into was just the racial wealth disparity, and you know, did a lot of research and a lot of reading. And one of the studies that was out there actually quantified, you know, the cost of Black inequality was about $16 trillion over 20 years, for the last 20 years. And so just to kind of give you some perspective, the US economy in 2022 was 25 trillion, right? So if you think over that time, it's like, hey, if you're losing like 5% of the total US economy, that's a huge impact. And that's what the cost of Black inequality has been. Right. And so at that point, I figured it's like, okay, what can I do? Right. And I started thinking about other things. I didn't even think what I could do in my own role. But then one of the things that I thought about was, hey, by the way, in my role, you know, we're in essence, many ways, providers of capital when we think about the cash that we have on our balance sheet. And so I thought, you know, maybe there's something we can do. And so started looking at different options and talking to a lot of different people. And then the one thing that stood out even from the report was, hey, homeownership is the #1 way that people actually build wealth in the US. And then when I look at that, when they quantified the whole cost of Black inequality, a big part was just a lack of access to capital. So whether it's capital for buying a home, going to college, or starting a business. And so this is where I saw that opportunity. And so, you know, another one of those things, you know, I was afraid. I was like, I'm not going to bring this to management and say, by the way, we have an opportunity here to make a difference. And I actually didn't want to do it, to be honest. I didn't want to do it. But my gut kept telling me, it's like, hey, you got to do something. This is right in front of you. So, you know, found the courage, brought it up. And to my surprise, management was like, hey, yeah, let's do it. The board was like, let's go, let's do it. And so we ended up really focusing the fund, there's $100 million like you mentioned, focusing the fund on home ownership, entrepreneurship, and also like the neighborhood revitalization, because those are the three big areas that we thought we had an opportunity to influence. So, it went live in February of 2021. And so, that cash was deployed within 11 months. So by the end of the year, was already deployed. So you can imagine if 100 million can be deployed that fast, think how big the need is, right? And so when I just kind of give you some of the outcomes that we've seen so far. So about 360 mortgages have been funded, and about 140 of those have gone to women. And so those have been the recipients of these mortgages. And then there's about almost 1,800 rental units that have been funded as well. And one of the interesting things that we actually found through that whole process was almost 90% of those households were led by Black women that were funded. And so, so those are the things that we're saying, like, hey, we're really having an impact where we wanted to have the impact. And then we just got an interesting, statistic the other day that, like we said, the whole goal of this was to really help build wealth. And just over the last 2 years, the equity that has been built up in these homes that they've bought is up 20%. So it's almost $90,000, right? So this is making a real difference to where now it's like, if you want to start a business, if you want to go, send your kids to college, or whatever it is that you might want to do to just improve your life, this is actually making a difference. And so I'm glad I actually went through with it, and we could see that, the funds working out there. So ServiceNow was a great partner. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you went through with it as well. Yeah, you took Darcy's advice, did it afraid. And look, that's the definition of putting your money where your mouth is, or putting your organization's money where its mouth.
Exactly. That's right.
Okay, so we're going to sidestep a little bit, and we're going to acknowledge the fact that in our audience today, we have a few allies. All right, so we're going to now talk about allyship. So Darcy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how allies can show up and their role in amplifying Black excellence.
Thank you. Allies play a critical role. As you know, the makeup of most organizations, there's very few where Black talent has critical mass. So the first thing I challenge all to do is really open your mind as to what an ally really is. I look at you and Tim being here with us today. Majority of the audience is women. Our focus is on amplifying Black excellence. And you all are playing a critical role in this conversation as our allies. So I want people to understand that allies can look like you, and sometimes that they don't. Men, they can be women, they can be other people of color. And, when you think about the role of the ally and the benefits of having allies, many times those allies that I speak about, they're in those critical rooms that we may not have privy or access to right now. The allies have an opportunity to uplift and to amplify the talent that is within their specific teams and throughout the organization. So I always attempt to challenge allies to expand their circles. One exercise I used to do in meetings is I would challenge leaders to look at their phones and look at their contacts and ask them if they would eliminate anyone that could be their family or a part of their reporting structure. How much diversity is in your immediate contact list? If you notice that there is diversity lacking there, you can change that. And while we may all look different and we may come from different places, we all know that equity is the only thing that will change the face of corporate America and tech. When we think about innovation, when we think about how to continue to propel ourselves forward, we have to do it together. I also challenge those that are on the call that look like me to identify allies that don't look like you, because of the points that I mentioned ahead of time. You never know what an ally will do for your career. I'm here now because I had an ally. And I try to be an ally for others, and I encourage you strongly to develop those relationships, to work those relationships. Because when you think about allies, mentor, sponsor, there is work for you to do. It's not just on them. You have to show up and you have to show out and do your best work and bring your A game. I cannot tell you how much that will benefit you, and it will also help the ally grow as well.
I've often heard that how people speak about you when you're not in the room matters a lot in your career. So that's something for us allies to, take to heart. I've also heard that allyship should be considered more of a verb as opposed to a noun. So it's something that you're not complete in doing. It's something that you're always constantly doing. Now, Andrea, now I want to come to you, and I want to hear your perspective on how you can, speak to the whole allyship piece, and maybe being a manager of color, you can offer some great perspective.
For sure. I don't want to reveal my age, but I've been in and out of corporate for almost 10 years. And this is the first year that I've had a manager of color. And even though we can like bond over food and travel stories and how we show up for our friends and our families, she's the first boss I've ever had that works with me at an eye level. Like I never feel undermined or underhanded or like second guessed at all. And I think it speaks volumes to her character, and it gives me a lot of motivation to show up the same way. And no matter what it is I'm curious to try, I know that she's gonna support it. Like I know that she wants me to try my best, but I know that she's not going to make me feel any shame for not feeling my best. Like if I'm not feeling up for it, she's very receptive to that. So I like to show up for other people that same way. I'm always telling people that like, she feels like my rich auntie who just wants to level me up instead of like my parents who's basing their success off of like my own success, which is a lot of pressure. Like last year when I got the chance to go to Afrotech with you guys and support the DEI department, I just wanted to be there and help out as much as possible. And I had an incredible time. And I was so excited to get back and talk to my team about it because a lot of them had never even like heard of Afrotech. They didn't know that a Black tech conference existed. And it was our most senior managing editor who also is also a managing editor for Forbes that asked me to write a story for Forbes.com to illustrate my experiences. And it was so humbling and I was flattered, but I was ultimately just grateful because my manager was the person who was advocating for me to go and making sure that she did everything in her power for me to be there. So without that type of support, I couldn't even imagine that opportunity, manifesting. She's always very aware that I'm the only Black woman in a lot of the rooms that I'm in. And that's so important to me, like for so many reasons, because if there's a gate that's keeping me from advancing in my career, I know that she's working twice as hard to get that gate open for me. And it's helped me get a lot of respect from people outside of my team as well. Like some of the most senior or the most executive people at ServiceNow, have spoken to me at eye level as well. And I really think it has a lot to do with the fact that she'll constantly make sure that my name is in rooms. Like she's never, sweeping what I do under a rug. So that's been my motivation to show up the same way and to make sure that I'm always opening doors for other people and making sure that anyone I work with, no matter what level they're on, associate, intern, they feel seen and heard and respected.
So Andrea's manager has set the bar for how a manager should be, because the smile that came across her face when she was describing her, that's the bar, you all. That's the bar. So we're about to get into our last question. So I urge everybody who is tuning in to go ahead and put their questions in the chat so we can get to them after this one. So this last piece I'd like to touch on. I'd like you all to please share one piece of advice you have for our audience on how they can celebrate and amplify Black excellence and Black voices in the workplace and in their communities, either through networking, recognition, or philanthropy. So since Andrea just talked, I'm gonna go to Darcy. Darcy, if you could speak on this, please, that'd be great.
Okay, I'm going to take liberty and go a little bit beyond the 1 point, because the first thing I would say is I'm going to share with you my superpower and challenge you to find your own. Mine is identifying opportunities where others can't see them, not only for myself, but for others. I had the distinct pleasure to be in California a few weeks ago and just randomly grabbing lunch, I ran into Tim. Tim said to me, I want to talk to you because I really want to strengthen our pipeline of talent and ensure that it is diversified for our finance team. And I said, okay, give me a minute. I was like, I might have something for you. And I thought about it and I asked him to join us here today. So again, think about how do you find opportunities? Now, there's opportunities that are very clear and crystal, but then there's other opportunities that if you take just a moment to chew on and think about, you can 100% amplify yourself. Additionally, Andrea raised her hand and the middle of us planning for Afrotech. She said, I'm here. I don't know how you can use me, but I'm gonna jump in. We had a few snafus on our way to Afrotech. Andrea figured out a way to help us. We now had an opportunity to literally share with our 20,000 global attendees a sneak peek of what it's like to experience Afrotech. When I say you are a gift, I mean it. And I challenge each and every one of you to operate in said gift. Alex, we are identifying another gift that you have here today. And I thank you for it.
Okay, I don't have any Kleenex to wipe up the tears that are welling in my eyes, but it's okay, I'm gonna let them roll. Tim, I'm gonna go to you next. Do you have any advice for the people tuning in today to how to amplify Black excellence and Black voices in the workplace, in their communities, either through networking, recognition, or philanthropy?
And how am I supposed to follow that? No, I think here's maybe two things. So one is what I kind of said off the top. In terms of being known for something, right? And so sometimes we don't even think about those as accomplishments, but just being known for something, right? It could be, like I said, problem solving, creating an idea, whatever it is. Like people come to you for something because that's what they know you for. And then don't be afraid to embrace it, right? And embrace it and talk about it, talk about your accomplishments. Sometimes it's hard for us to talk about what we've accomplished because like, I just want to keep my head down. Like Darcy said earlier, it's like, keep my head down, just do the work, right? But sometimes you have to be out there, talk about it so people know what you're doing for one, right? And also, it also gives people ideas of, hey, I can also do the same thing, right? Especially in our communities, like, hey, this person did this, like, hey, tell me how you went about it. So you become a resource for them. And then the second thing, which was great advice I got from Ken Coleman, who was actually one of the first SVPs at HP. And I had just talking to him and just things like, hey, by the way, it's like a move, it's like kind of move up the corporate ladder. It's like, I sometimes like, I keep feeling like I have to prove myself. And then he stopped me right away and told me, he's like, why do you have to prove yourself? You already got the job, just do the job. And that really resonated with me. Because sometimes we do feel like we're an imposter. At least I do feel like sometimes I'm an imposter, right? But it's like, no, you already got the job, just do it.
I've often felt like that during my first year with ServiceNow.
Yeah.
Full transparency. So it's amazing to hear someone of your stature be able to speak to that as well. And that's something I think we're constantly having to face as members of underrepresented groups. So it's encouraging for sure to hear advice like that. Now, Andrea, you're going to round us off with your advice on how we can amplify Black excellence, Black voices in the workplace and in the communities, either through networking, recognition, or philanthropy.
Okay. So I definitely feel like it's easy to, well, it's probably easy for any of us to fall into like this habitual routine of checking off boxes all day so that we can feel accomplished. But I really encourage everyone to think about the first time you've done something. And it could be as simple as the first time you're trying a new style, or like me, the first time you're on a panel, but you're feeling nervous and anxious and you're like worried about how you're going to be perceived by other people. But I want everyone to think about when they finally feel like a sense of relief. And if it's after someone says to you like, oh, you look great, or I love your hair, or you did a great job on that panel, or whatever it is, that source of validation is so important, especially when it's coming from an authentic space, because we've all been there and we've all had something that made us feel, like Tim was saying, like an imposter. But it's important to just have or give reminders to other people to let them know that they're seen and let them know that they're appreciated. So definitely take it into account to be more validating with the people that you work with and focus less on checking off boxes just to feel personally fulfilled.
Thank you for that. Thank you for rounding us off with how to amplify Black excellence. So we're now going to transition into the Q&A portion. So I see that we have at least one question in chat. Again, if you have some questions, feel free to drop them in chat and we'll get to them. I'm going to start off with, I do not want to butcher your name. So I'm just going to read your question because you know that you asked your question. So how can I educate myself on the history and struggles of the Black community? I'm going to pass this one to Darcy first.
Okay, I will take that question. I think one of the first things I encourage people to do, regardless of where you are, is you have to put forth the work. With information being at your fingertips, whether on the internet, there are books and movies, the information is out there. And you just have to go and you have to diligently seek it. I don't want to list like names and books and different things because I'm afraid that I might leave some critical ones out. But there is one thing I would recommend you do before you approach someone from the Black community is to do some work and begin to educate yourself. I happen to be a Black history nut, always learning, always growing. I'm Black, and there's always more for me to learn. And I think that when you do the work of researching and reading and watching, and it allows you to have a more educated conversation with someone from the Black community. I do encourage allies not to go to a Black person and ask them to provide you the history. But I do encourage you that after you have done your work, then you can have those conversations, because the history of Black people is not separate from world or American history. We are not a monolith, which means that we don't have a cheat sheet of facts that we will regurgitate off the top of our heads. I, for one, and I don't want to speak for everyone on this panel, I welcome questions and conversations if you've done the work. So my short answer is, you can put in Google, you can Google Black history. You can go to Netflix, Hulu, whatever your streaming service is, and you will find a plethora, especially during Black History Month, that will provide you various sources of history. So it really depends on what part of history you're looking to learn more about, because it is a very, very rich history that goes back further than our arrival in the US and other countries.
No, honestly, the information is out there. I'm glad you pointed that out. So for anyone who has questions, look, we have all the resources nowadays, all the resources. More so about that desire and want to actually learn. So before I move on to the next question, Tim, Andrea, would you all like to speak to that question at all?
Oh, I think Darcy said it best. So I don't think I have anything else
she
to
covered
add on
it for
that.
sure.
It did. You can't follow Darcy sometimes.
Nope.
I should have went with Tim first.
Just gotta let it go.
Yeah. I know for next time. Okay, so for this question, what can we do to create safer and more just spaces for Black excellence to thrive? So since we went with Darcy first, we're gonna go with Andrea first this time. So again, that question, what can we do to create safer and more just spaces for Black excellence to thrive?
Love that question. So there's a first thought that I had, but I don't want it to come across insensitive, but it's definitely to read the room. And I don't mean that insensitively. I definitely just encourage people to acknowledge what might make someone feel uncomfortable, because of course you're not always going to know, but it could be something as simple as someone not getting credit for something. So if you notice that a person of color isn't getting credit for work that that they've done, the first, the direct route to allyship is to ensure that they receive that credit and that recognition, because maybe for the person of color, they're so accustomed to it that they'll dismiss it and they'll just say to themselves like, okay, well, this is something that's always happening. And so it just perpetuates that history. But instead, just disrupt it, read the energy of the room, acknowledge that everyone is so excited to congratulate the wrong person, and then redirect that energy towards the person who deserves that credit. And that's just one example, but definitely taking steps back, like acknowledging that a lot of people of color are really accustomed to keeping their head down or, being last in line. So being that person who can get out of the line and ensure that the person who's just so used to this type of treatment is being empowered to no longer treat themselves that way. It's like you're rewriting history right there. And it's definitely amplifying what that person wants to do with them, with their career, with their life, whatever. But just knowing that they have someone who's supporting them and encouraging them and willing to get on the ground so that they can, get on their back and actually have some leverage. That's really important, I think.
I love that piece of advice, especially for the folks who may have grown up in maybe more communal cultures or environments. You're not used to highlighting your own accomplishments. So it's very important, very just of someone to highlight someone else's accomplishments when they may not even be recognizing it themselves. So thank you for that. Tim, I'm now going to ask that same question to you if you have anything to speak to it. What can we do to create safer and more just spaces for Black excellence to thrive?
Since I've kind of been in the game more than a minute, so what I try to do is really have conversations, especially with early in career and even people who are sort of mid careers, if you call it that, is just have conversations of my experience, right? And how to navigate. How do you navigate the corporate environment? Especially for me, having been in companies where I was either the only Black person in finance or just one in the company, right? And then, just kind of my progression of my career is like, how do you navigate different situations? How do you look for opportunities, right? And so kind of helping in that, in that, but I also try to also take a pulse, right? And say, it's like, okay, when you came here, what were your expectations, right? Are we still meeting those expectations? And if not, why not? Right, because that's the only way you kind of find out exactly what's going on. So essentially you're open to listening as to what's working and what's not working. And then for me is now to go back and say, like, hey, by the way, here's what we need to do differently, right? And we're already doing that like for our finance team. I'm leading sort of like the D&I efforts on the finance team. And so that's the feedback I take back and say, by the way, leadership team, here's what's working, here's what's not working, and here's what we need to do different, right? So that's how I see, kind of creating that, that space and just helping, the development.
No, I like that point about taking a pulse. I think it could be very easy to have somebody come in the door and just say, all right, job done, we're all good to go. But no, having that check-in, that's vital. So we probably have time for one more question. Before I get into the next question, Darcy, would you like to speak to that last one at all?
Sure. I definitely echo Andrea and Tim. I think when we think about what we can do to create safer spaces and for Black excellence to thrive, you can start with just the basic conversations, as Tim said. Letting people know that you are there. Every day we wake up, different things are happening throughout the world, whether it's in your backyard or in a country sometimes you may never have even heard of. When you make yourself available to people, that helps to really break down the barriers to psychological safety. When you are in a leadership role, you want to create safe spaces and more spaces. Again, I have to go back to Tim. He is 100% committed to diversifying what finance looks like and helping break kind of that mold of what people think about when they think about finance. Tell people, I want to create a diverse pipeline of talent if and when roles are open. Make it clear when you are at the midpoint of your career. start having those conversations afraid. Start sharing, in a professional manner, of course, what your experience is like when you have an opportunity. And when you're younger in your career, or I guess at any level, get involved. Most companies have an EBG, ERG, whatever it is you want to call it. It is an employee resource or business group. Join the one that you most associate with, but then join one that will allow you and force you to grow and to learn. That way, you're not only able to create a safe space for yourself, but you're allowing yourself to be a safe space for others.
I love the EBG piece, utilizing resources that may already be available to you and seeing how you can leverage those. So our last question, we may have time to eke in another one. We'll see. Let me get this question and I'll go back to you, Darcy. I feel like you're best equipped to answer this. What is ServiceNow doing to provide more inclusive and equitable opportunities for Black excellence to be seen and heard?
I go back to what Tim had mentioned. We have a diversity advisory council. And this council is made up of not only our senior leadership, we have leaders such as Tim, who are like on the ground, really taking deep dives into what's happening, not only within their function, but across the organization, and identifying what those barriers are. Are the barriers in hiring? Are the barriers in development? Are there barriers in promotion? And so when you have leaders that have carved out time from their very busy schedule to help ensure that there is an equitable space for all, I think that is a huge win and continued win for ServiceNow. Additionally, we have opportunities to show up like this, and for and with audiences like this. So having an opportunity to share with an organization like Power to Fly what our experience is, you're able to see us representation from different levels. And I think that ServiceNow, we have a journey to go, just like corporate America. But I will say that I am very proud of our company. I am proud of our leaders who are digging in, and they're determined to solve this.
And if I could just add just real quick onto that. So one of the things, for example, we're doing in finance, right? So, there's top talent, especially from underrepresented groups. And so what we're doing is actually taking that top talent and saying, we're going to match you up with a finance leader. So someone on the leadership team. So this is a way for them to be seen, right? And also to be coached. Because sometimes they're at levels where they might not have that access to that leadership team. But in this case, they're actually being matched up with the leadership team, and they're spending time with them over the next 12 months or so. So that's I just wanted to add that on there.
No, I'm glad you added that piece.
Yeah.
There are definitely honest and concerted efforts at ServiceNow to amplify Black excellence. So I'm definitely happy and honored to be a part of that, as are the rest of my colleagues, I assume. So now we're on the tail end, so we do have to wrap up. I did want to skate this last question in, maybe like a sentence or two from everybody just to wrap us up. What do you think are the biggest barriers preventing Black excellence from being recognized? So a sentence or two, I know that's not a lot, but I'm gonna pass this off to Andrea first. Again, the question is, what do you think the biggest barriers what do you think are the biggest barriers for preventing Black excellence from being recognized?
Fear. I think when a person fears their own trajectory and where that's going, or maybe just their own career path and where that's going, then it could be easier for them to maybe get in the way, and they won't think about the next person and how that person can also be uplifted and amplified. And that's why I spoke so highly of my manager and us being able to work from an eye level or eye to eye level, because then I know that I'm gonna consistently be treated fairly, and I don't have to worry about how many years I have under my belt, or how many people I'm like chummy with. Like, I know for a fact that my work is what my what my career trajectory is going to be based on. And I think it's important to approach anyone in your community with that fearlessness. So.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, Sandra too. Tim, how to remove those Black barriers, or the biggest ones facing Black excellence?
Sometimes just lack of opportunity. I think that's a big one for me. Just not getting the opportunity to even showcase our work, right? And so it just never gets to a certain level, right? It just essentially dies at say at whether it's a director level or even a manager level, and it just doesn't get seen at that point. I think that's one of the biggest one. And I think the other one I would say is sometimes I've seen this in my career. It just didn't look the part. I just did not look the part. And so I just did not get that opportunity.
That's a good one. All right, Darcy, round us off.
All right, I'd link both of them up and just lump it into a scarcity mindset. You don't have to lose for someone else to win. In fact, when you give others an opportunity to win, we all win.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right, Meg, we're going to pass this off to you. That concludes our panel. Thank you all for joining us. But Meg's going to say a few words and sign us off.
Thank you so much, Alexander. And I want to say a big thank you to the entire panel, Doris, Tim, and Andrea, as well as Alexander. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your time and your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. We're about to move into our next session, which is going to be a recording. So until then, I hope you enjoy the recordings, and we'll be back here to start our next session at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Have fun, y'all.